Laying the foundations for sustainable growth, how higher interest rates impact the economy. Hi everyone and welcome to Ainslie Insights, brought to you by ainslie.com.au, the home of Ainslie Bullion, Ainslie Crypto, Ainslie Wealth and the Gold and Silver Standard. Be sure to have a look. Today we have a very special guest. We've got Jordan, who's joining us for our Insights debut. He's one of the sales consultants up here in the Brisbane office. He's very interested in all this, sort of the economics behind all this. We're having an excellent conversation about this the other day. How are you going today, Jordan?
Very well, thank you, Mr. Chris. How are you?
Yeah, good. Look, thank you for coming on. We were having this great conversation around interest rates and this whole idea that there's actual logic behind all this. It's funny because on here we often have these conversations around what are they doing? Do they really know what they're doing? But you were sort of highlighting to me that there really is quite a bit of logic, quite a bit of economic theory, at least, that goes into why they do what they're doing. So I thought that was interesting to talk about today. You wrote a bit
Absolutely.
of an article about that people will be able to read, but start us off with a bit of a background. What do you see the impacts being of increasing the cash rate? Why is it that really they do that in the first place? What are they attempting to do in the economy?
Hmm. So, I mean, if you look at it, you can look at it through both a short-term and long-term sort of time horizon. It's obviously a bit of a monetary policy that can have an effect on lots of different key indicators for, I guess the overall health of our economy. And when you increase the cash rates, it just sends through. It's a bit of a flow-on effect, and it's just trickles through one by one.
Mm.
So it starts with increasing the cash rate. I mean, what is that fundamentally? It just means the cost of borrowing is more, right?
Yeah.
And that just means from a consumer level and from an institutional level, from an investor level, you're just going to be less likely to want to borrow money. So that's in the short term. That is essentially it in a nutshell. And how that affects the economy, when you're less likely to not borrow money, then the GDP growth will go down because there'll be less money, stimulating in the economy, and people will be, feel a bit tighter from that squeeze. And then when there's less money stimulating the economy, there's less jobs that are being created. So that has a whole, effect on the sort of economy.
And I suppose that's the thing. I think people do understand that to some degree. They get that
Mm.
there's obviously a level of thinking that's going on behind the scenes to go, well, we're trying to slow the economy down, like you just mentioned, when that we go through periods like we went through of interest rates increasing. They're
Mm.
very keen for it to get to the other side, though, because when we start to experience rates coming back, like we have recently with the start of those cuts, people go, okay, this is good. We feel like we can survive. There's a little bit of breathing room again.
But what does that have an effect on the economy is then inflation goes through the roof. So there's a balancing act that the RBA has to sort of play that game.
Well, and that's where it's interesting to have this question around the longer term that you're talking about, because
Mm.
if we look at the longer term play here, if we've started to see what's happened at the moment, inflation seems to have stabilized. Is it the right thing for the central bank to be cutting where they are at the moment?
I would say absolutely not. I mean, if the RBA was to then increase the cash rate to anchor inflation, it'll strengthen economic stability and it would lay the groundwork for long-term sustainable growth. What that means is there would be a bit of pain in the short run, as I was talking about earlier,
Mm.
because consumer sentiment will decrease. Therefore, you're less likely to spend money because you're feeling that tight squeeze. And then when there's less money being spent, then that affects the employment. That being said, increasing the cash rate will mean there's less demand for general goods and products. So the CPI will go down. But as you would probably know, Chris, when the CPI goes down, it's not an immediate effect. There's
Mm.
usually that 6 to 12 months sort of time delay until it actually goes down. So once you start to see the effects and you see that deflationary sort of system, then the consumer sentiment will increase. And that's where you've got the different views when you're looking at things in a short-term time horizon versus the long-run time horizon. Once that decreases, sorry, once that consumer sentiment increases after the cash rate, the CPI sort of evens itself out,
Just moderates
then you
out. Yeah.
see people are more likely to want to spend more. And then when there's spending more, then the unemployment sort of evens itself out. So it all just depends how you're looking at things and what time horizon you're looking at.
And it's just such an interesting discussion because a lot of people are going to disagree with you here, right? Like a lot of people are going to say, look, they should have cut rates earlier. We've had rates too high for too long. It's made things unaffordable for people trying to get into the housing market. Or there's going to be many arguments people are going to make for why it's in their best interest, because it is certainly in their best interest for lower rates.
Mm,
But it's the part of the discussion that we were having, which was so interesting, was to say, yeah, but a lot of people who will be watching this will also say that they think there should be effectively, we should be returning to a gold standard, or we should be having some of these constraints on government and
mm,
constraints on ourselves that force
mm.
us to live within our budget. And
Exactly
that's
right.
kind of what you seem to be saying here, that we need to think beyond the short term pain to actually solve some of these bigger issues, and that cutting rates may just be exacerbating that same cycle that we've seen over and over again.
Exactly right. Yeah, you hit the nail on the head there. I mean, you look at sort of Seyfried, he talks a lot on time horizons. It's only human nature that if you've got the choice of consuming now versus consuming in the future, you're going to choose now, right?
Mm.
So if I gave you the example yesterday, if you can purchase a Toyota Yaris now versus a Toyota Yaris 1 year from now, you're almost always going to choose now. However, if you're able to create an economy that, I guess, incentivizes that long term delayed consumption, then you can go, well, do I purchase that Toyota Yaris now, or can I get a Rolls Royce in a year's time?
And that's a really good example. In that situation, people probably would wait and
Exactly
would,
right.
yeah.
Yeah.
So
So, yeah, sorry, you go.
I was just going to say, to wrap some of that up. I mean, if you look at some of these different schools of thought,
Uh,
would you say that you sit more towards, like, what school of thought would you say you sit more towards here? And maybe to wrap this up, it would be interesting if you were to tie that back a little bit to gold and silver when you think about where they fit in this picture for people. Is it aligned, or is there a juncture where it fits with some of this talk around different schools of thought around monetary policy?
Yeah, so I'm interested because I guess the two contrary schools of thoughts that I've looked at personally, you got the Keynesian sort of economics, and he was quoted for saying, "Well, in the long run, we're all dead." So, in other words, consume now, and in his time, that was probably appropriate because they were they went off the gold standard to go fund a war,
Hmm.
and it was a legit war, and they're trying to save lives. So that was the advantage of that first sort of initial fiat currency. But then, Murray Rothbard, who sits more towards that Austrian Chicago sort of school of economics, they talk about delaying that immediate consumption. And how, I think he even articulates, I got the quote here, how the lowering of time preference signifies an increase in willingness to forego present consumption for the sake of something better and bigger in the future, and how foregoing that immediate consumption is just the ability to think and plan beyond the present, which just advances human civilization.
Look, there's some big topics there, and I think it will be a great conversation that we've had in terms of sparking a little bit of debate around
Mm,
what approaches governments should be making, what approaches we as an Australian society should be taking towards some of these issues, because we all emotionally want those rate cuts, because personally we go, it impacts me. It makes it so I can breathe because I've been under the foot of heavy rates for a long period
exactly
of time.
right.
But you make some valid points there about the
You can
real.
feel that strangle in the future.
That's it. If we want to break this cycle, we've got to make some tough decisions at some point along the line.
Absolutely, Chris.
Look, love your work on that today, Jordan. We'll absolutely have to keep getting you back to keep exploring some more of these topics, because I know you love digging into the weeds on some of these economic policies and how they impact us. So thank you for your work on that today. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, mate. Glad to be on here.
Thanks everyone for watching. We'll chat again soon.